Hey freaks, it's JJ. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I talk about rock and metal music and the stories that go behind some of my favorite concept albums. I am also an author as well, and I just recently published my debut novella titled Arias for the band Illyria. I worked in collaboration with the band to turn their concept album into a full-fledged book. So if you're interested in that, drop down to the link in the description to go check that out. Also, if you happen to speak Portuguese, we also just published the translation of Arias into Portuguese, and that will be available also down in the description if you are interested. Anyway, needless to say, I love storytelling and I love music, so I'm very excited to talk about today this band called Summoning the Lich and their 2021 album United in Chaos. And I actually discovered this band from my friend Kristen, who she also has a YouTube channel if you want to check that out. She does a bunch of really cool, amazing handmade merch stuff for all you metalheads out there, and she always uses officially licensed band merch for all of her projects. So yeah, check her out. I'll also put her down in the description if you're interested. But anyway, she introduced this band to me and they are fantastic. They have this really amazing fantasy story that goes along with their music, and usually you get to see these really cool fantasy things in a lot of like power metal concept albums that I've covered, but they are just a full-on classic like death metal band, and it's really cool to see the depth of the concept album in a death metal band of this style. So really excited to cover this album. Of course, this is just my my opinion, my take on the story, and it's by no means the official story. I did read a lot of like band interviews to try and get their scope on everything, and I did hear that they are working possibly on coming out with like a novel or some kind of like codex or something for this this world and this concept, which would be so cool. And please ask me to write it for you because I have experience and I love this world that you created, and I'm an author. But anyway, let's talk about Summoning the Lich and United in Chaos. Before we get started, make sure you hit subscribe and hit the little bell thingy to get notified when I put out other content such as this. Also, if you're interested, feel free to join my Metalhead community, where you can get access to bonus content and monthly newsletters from me. Link to that will be down in the description. Anyway, let's jump into this amazing story that we have here. So some kind of background knowledge that you kind of need to know that has to do with the world building of this fantasy world. It takes place in a land called Arias, and this is just like a world that is full of like darkness that is just waiting to devour humanity. And so these like kind of vile beings made of like destruction and evil are, kind of held at bay from taking over the world through this like veil of chaos. And it's this sort of like magical barrier that these druids have kept in place for centuries and centuries, and it just kind of protects the world of man from all these forces of evil that are beyond the veil. But these druids who have been keeping up this veil have kind of been forgotten by humanity, and men have sort of turned their backs on the druids in favor of progress towards the future. And so through the eons of time that has passed, the druids have slowly begun to die out, and one by one the druids have given their lives to uphold this veil, and so now we have but one remaining druid, the very last one, and that is where our story actually begins. So here we start off with track number 1, The Nightmare Begins. So we have the old druid, the very last of his kind, in the kingdom of Rador, and he's been maintaining the Veil of Chaos alone for centuries. And so the years have weighed pretty heavily on him, and he's really weak, and he's tired, and he's very close to death by this point in time. And his kind of like hatred for the selfishness of humanity has really begun to fester over time. And the people that he spent his entire life trying to protect care nothing for all the sacrifice that him and the other druids have done for them. And so in order to stay alive, he ends up seeking this really dangerous power, one that could destroy all of humanity. And so we find him unearthing this ancient buried shrine that is able to unleash all chaos. And so these demonic creatures end up clawing their way into existence, and the druid prepares to seize control of the minds of men. And so he begins to harness the power of this demonic force that he unleashed through this chaos, and he starts casting these spells. An army of men do rise up to try and stop this evil sorcerer before he can complete his spell. But what they don't know is that this is actually a trap. And so the druid has lured these men into his cave as a way to kind of fulfill the sacrifice needed to complete the spell. So in the final acts of the spell, the druid is able to trade his soul for power and immortality, and he becomes the Lich. And so kind of the way I like to look at this album and look at kind of the metaphors and the themes that we see throughout this album is in the way of like identifying things as like deadly sins. And so I'll be talking a little bit about how a lot of each of these songs relate to a different sin of humanity and how they are kind of collected into one. And so this track I think really represents the wrath of the druid and how, you know, that has caused him to become the Lich. We then move on to track number 2, Cult of Ophidian. And so here we meet a new character. He is named the Watcher. And so this Watcher gazes into the future, and what he sees on this one vision is ultimate bloodshed, devastation, and just complete madness. And all of it is at the hands of this one powerful being who kind of bends men's wills to his own. And so our Watcher can't really see this being because he's kind of blocked from his sight, but he sees the destruction that this being will bring. And so our Watcher wakes from his vision, and he tries to go warn his clan of what is to unfold. But when he tells everyone about what he saw, they refuse to heed his warning. So he goes to seek the elder of the clan, only to find that the elder has been corrupted by this being already. So this being ends up kind of possessing this elder. And so the being speaks through the elder's lips and condemns the Watcher to a fate worse than death. So this being, which we find out is the leader of this cult of Ophidian, has ended up tricking the people of the Watcher's clan. And so this being made all of the people of the clan believe that the Watcher kind of refused to warn them of what is to come. And so they think that the Watcher had joined the cult of Ophidian and purposefully not told them of all the destruction that is to come. And so the clan kind of went out lynch mob style and damned the Watcher's soul for all eternity, when in reality the Watcher was of course innocent, and he too was a victim of the cult just as much as they were. And so I believe that in this way the Lich is collecting him as an example for the sin of gullibility. Track 3, The Gatekeeper. So after the Lich's awakening, there are a bunch of different armies that rise up to try and stop him. So first we have this valiant king, Elgar, who leads his armies across the sea to try and destroy the evil forces taking over the land. And so here we meet another character. He is called the Dragon Lord of Suffering, and his name is, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but it's Algalaric. I'm probably saying that way wrong, but that's my best attempt at that name. So this Dragon Lord is the one who's kind of taken the opportunity provided by the unleashing of chaos that the Lich has provided and using it to go about his own goals and kind of take over more land while everyone is distracted by all the chaos going on. And so King Elgar wants to try and stop him. And so the king arrives at the water gates to the kingdom of the Dragon Lord, and all of a sudden these demon creatures start crawling up from the sea and attacking the king and his legion. And so these creatures, these demons, they end up just completely decimating the king's ships, and every man on board finds themselves in a watery grave. And so this track I kind of see as being the Lich collecting the sin of hubris. We then move on to track number 4, Demon of the Snow, and this is probably one of my favorite tracks on the whole album. I love this track. If you haven't heard of this band before and you listen to no other song on this album, please listen to Demon of the Snow. So by now the dark forces that the Lich has unleashed have now taken over nearly every kingdom in all of Arias. But one kingdom holds out, and it is a castle in the middle of this snowy mountain range that is protected from invading armies by way of a horrendous beast. And so each year these people gather in a ceremony to kind of thank the demon Lord of the Snow and pacify his hunger for another year by providing him with the sacrificial virgins. And so on this night of the feast of the ceremony, the beast ends up awakening with a new sentience granted to him through the power of the Lich. So the beast ends up turning on these people who have enslaved him for all these years and tricked him with these virgins, and he ends up making these people become slaves to him, and as he had been a slave to them for all those years. And so here we have the Lich collecting one more soul and one more sin, and that is the sin of gluttony, as the beast, who I kind of imagine is like a snowy Yeti version of like a dragon. He represents the gluttony that he espoused through all the years of just feasting on virgins instead of waking up to see what was actually happening. We then move on to track number 5, Predatory Reflection. And here we get another glimpse into kind of like the corruptive power that the Lich has unleashed and how he inspires each person to kind of become indulgent slaves of their worst sin. And so here we meet a woman who has kind of fallen victim to her own vanity. So she ends up getting tricked by the face staring back at her in the mirror, which of course has been corrupted by the Lich. And so blinded by her pride, she becomes trapped in this mirror. And in this mirror, she is then forced to see the ugliness of her own soul and, just kind of stare at how ugly she is on the inside for all eternity. And so she begins to go mad and starts to like mutilate her body, and she ends up even tearing out her own eyes so that she doesn't have to look at herself any longer. And so of course we here have the sin of pride. And I know not all of these are like the 7 deadly sins exactly, but some of them are, and some of them are not exactly falling into those specific categories. But let's face it, there are a lot more sins than just 7. So anyway. Just a side note. So we get to track 6, Acid Rain. So this is the last of these sins that the Lich has to collect. And here we find another king who has marched his armies to defeat the evil Lich. So he's kind of greedy to finally be the one to take down this evil sorcerer. And so he will stop at nothing to defeat him and conquer this evil in the world, just to kind of lift himself up and be the like savior of all the kingdoms, more in a selfish way than a, heroic way, really. And so he gathers the largest army that the world has ever seen, every town and village that he passes on the way to take down the sorcerer. He forces every able-bodied man that he meets along the way into his army, and he marches them forward towards victory, and he burns all the rest to the ground to make room for his army. So he marches to the lair of the Lich, kind of, leaving burning villages and forests and fields in his path. And once he reaches his lair, the Lich stands atop his mountain, and he ends up slamming his staff into the ground in a very, Gandalf kind of way. And the ground shatters as the mountain then erupts. And so the flying pieces of rock and molten lava kind of just rain down on the king and completely decimate his army and burns them all in a very torturous and painful death. And so here, of course, the Lich collects the sin of greed. And that takes us right into track number 7, the title track, United in Chaos. So with ash still clouding the air, the Lich then collects all the villains that he has made. The Lotcher, King Elgar, the Demon of the Snow, the Woman in the Mirror, and the Soul of the King that he just defeated along with himself. And one more being called Evie the Temptress, which I'm not really sure what her story is. I feel like she might be touched upon in later stories of this band, but I couldn't really figure out where she fit into this, except that she was there, and maybe her story will be covered a little bit later. But needless to say, there are 7 of them, and they join together to kind of venerate this evil greatness that they all are reveling in. So they rejoice in rule over mankind together, and they sort of espouse whatever sin that they have brought to the table, and they inspire that sin in all the people that they meet along the way, and just kind of spread their evil chaos all throughout the world. And so the rest of the album kind of goes into detail, showing snippets of different people and their situations and how this evilness has affected their lives. So we get to track number 8, Descent. And so now that the Lich has collected, his A-team of basically the worst parts of humanity, he decides to unleash them on the world and give the humans kind of a taste of their own medicine, trying to show them, this is what you are to me, this is what you are deep down. Now you get to kind of, reap what you sow in a way. And so here we see all these evil entities that the Lich has collected kind of go about their work. And so they go about doing their worst to humanity, and when we come to meet another character, he is sort of like one of the last heroes of his village, and he is a young mage who has been captured by one of the Lich's cronies and set to be tortured. And so he is taken, and day after day just tortured. They cut him open and then cauterize his wounds, only for them to reopen those same wounds and more on the next day. And so he lies there dying, and he utters this incantation and hides away a vial of his blood before he dies, possibly as a way to kind of maybe resurrect himself later, or possibly to use in some spell by a loved one in some way. That would just be my guess. I have no evidence of that in the text exactly, but I feel like that is the thread that might be picked up again in a later installment of this story. Anyway, moving on to track 9, Hymns, the Witches of the West. So here we have a coven of witches who kind of set upon a village, and blood is spilled, and one night one of the high priestess sons of this coven is burned to death in retribution by one of the villagers. And so the coven then gathers their forces and they decide to seek vengeance. And so they kind of gather around this village and begin to chant, and then their incantation rises up, and then all of the children of this village begin to perish at the hands of their curse. And so once all the children of this village are dead, they then also rise from the dead and begin to terrorize the village as little children zombies. So all the people of the village then beg for their lives, but of course the witches give no mercy, and they do not stop until every single one of the people in the village has their hearts ripped out by their own undead children. Next up, we have track 10, Death Crystal. And so we come to a man of royal blood who's been exiled from his land that was conquered by an invading king. And so this man, this prince, sort of wanders endlessly throughout the desert, and he ends up meeting a woman who offers him a way to take back what was stolen from him. And so she gifts him this crystal and then mysteriously departs. So this prince then returns to his kingdom and uses the power of the crystal to kind of lay waste to the usurper of his throne, and all the nobles within the castle are also laid to waste as well for supporting him. And so, with each soul that the crystal kind of collects, it starts to grow darker and darker until it is completely black. So now the prince's vengeance is complete, but of course it comes at a price. And so the power of the crystal then transforms the prince into this monster beast type thing and enslaves him to the woman who gifted him the crystal forevermore. And next up, we have track number 11, Temple of the Bone. And so here I believe we return to the Lich, and we find that, he has succeeded in his plan. He's succeeded in kind of giving humanity what they deserve and everything. But he finds that, the glory of all the death and the destruction that he has wrought is not satisfied him the way that he thought it would. He now that he has kind of conquered the world and had his fun, there's not really anything left for him to do. And so he's immortal, of course, so he can't die, and he now starts to feel trapped by his own immortality. And he sees that a life that does not end is kind of meaningless in a way. And so he kind of just has nothing else to do other than continue creating more chaos and waiting for a death that will never come. And now we get to our 12th and final track, The Lure of the Necromancer, and this is probably my favorite story of the whole concept. I love this one so much. So the Lich, of course, now sort of regretting his decision to become immortal, he seeks out the only one who might be able to reverse this curse that he's put on himself. So he seeks out the Lord of Death, i.e. the Necromancer, and so he kind of stays on the sidelines and watches the necromancer go about his work. And so the necromancer comes to this man in mourning, and this man is mourning the loss of his betrothed, this woman who he was supposed to marry, that he loved with all his heart, but she ended up dying the night before they were to be wed. And so from the shadows of the graveyard, this figure appears to this man, and the being smells of rot and kind of like disgust, and he's sort of all cloaked in shadows. But he explains to the man that he can bring back the love of his life. And so the man asks, what the gift will cost. And the necromancer replies that the man need only feed her once she wakes, and then she will become his once more. And so the man, kind of lost in his grief, he agrees. And so the necromancer calls upon the dead, and the earth begins to shake, and hands kind of shoot up from the ground, and this woman kind of claws her way free of the grave, and the man finally meets his undead bride. And of course her body is all decay, and although she's animated, she is in no way considered alive by anyone's standards. So the man tells the necromancer in fear that this is not at all what he agreed to, but the Lord of Death only smiles and says that he has held up his end of the bargain, and it is now time for the man to hold up his end of the bargain and feed her. And so of course the undead bride launches at the man and tears through his flesh to feast on his guts. But the necromancer does not let him die. Oh no, of course he's not going to let him die. He spells the man's body to stay alive and makes him watch as the woman he used to love feasts on his own organs and eats him alive. So I just love how gruesome and sad that story is, and I love how dark all of these stories are. But I really enjoy how we get like just a really close glimpse on like how awful humanity really is, which is something we see covered a lot in dark fantasy, which is why I like it so much. I also like all the blood and gore and everything. But anyway, that is it for United in Chaos. I am so excited to see the other installments of this story and see where they go with it next. And yeah, I'm just excited for any and all lore that we get to see from this band. So as always, let me know what you think of this concept down in the comments. If you are a fan of this band as well, let me know if you kind of imagined any of these stories happening differently. And yeah, go give them a listen if you haven't heard of them. Anyway, that's all I have for this week. Make sure that you hit subscribe and join my Metalhead community if you want to. And yeah, feel free to go check out Arias in English and Portuguese. Link down in the description. Thanks for watching, freaks. Till next time.